The notification on my phone said, "Delivered," but I was standing right here at my front door watching the delivery truck pull away with my groceries still inside. The driver had looked me straight in the eye, shook his head and drove off. What he didn't know was that I wasn't just another customer he could dismiss. I was the CEO of the very company he worked for. Which country are you listening from? Tell us in the comments below. My name is Maya Johnson, and I built my life in America believing that hard work and determination could overcome any obstacle. At 34, I had achieved what many would call the American dream. I was the founder and CEO of QuickCart Delivery, a grocery delivery service that had grown from a small startup in my garage to a company serving 3 major cities with over 500 employees. Growing up in Detroit as the daughter of a single mother who worked 2 jobs, I learned early that success wasn't handed to anyone who looked like me. My mother, Angela, would tell me every morning before school, "Maya, baby, you're going to have to work twice as hard to get half as far, but don't let that stop you from going the whole distance." Those words became the foundation of everything I built. I earned my business degree from Michigan State on a full scholarship, started my first company at 25, and sold it for enough money to fund my real dream, QuickCart. The idea came to me during the pandemic when I noticed how many elderly people in my neighborhood couldn't get their groceries safely. I wanted to create a service that wasn't just about convenience, but about caring for our community. 5 years later, QuickCart employed drivers from all walks of life, many of whom were immigrants, college students, and people looking for a second chance. We prided ourselves on being more than just another delivery app. We were a company that believed in dignity, respect, and opportunity for everyone. I lived in Brookwood Heights, an affluent suburb of Cleveland, in a beautiful Tudor-style home I'd purchased with my own money. The neighborhood was predominantly white, something I was acutely aware of but tried not to let define my experience. I'd moved there because it was safe, had good schools for when I decided to start a family, and represented the success I'd worked so hard to achieve. Most of my neighbors were polite, though I could feel the curiosity in their glances. Some would ask what I did for work with a tone that suggested they were trying to figure out how I afforded to live there. I'd answer with pride about my company, watching their expressions shift from skepticism to surprise to something resembling respect. The Hendersons next door were genuinely friendly. Tom was a doctor and Susan taught high school chemistry. They'd welcomed me with homemade cookies when I moved in and always waved when we saw each other. But even they sometimes made comments that revealed their assumptions. "You're so articulate," Susan once said after I explained a complex business strategy. "I mean, you speak so well." The compliment stung because it revealed her surprise that I could be both black and eloquent. Down the street lived the Carmichaels, an older couple who had lived in Brookwood Heights for 40 years. They weren't openly hostile, but Mrs. Carmichael had a habit of asking me if I was visiting someone whenever she saw me walking in the neighborhood. Even after 2 years of living there, she still seemed surprised to see me. The most telling interactions were with the various service providers who came to the neighborhood. Landscapers, repair technicians, and delivery drivers would often assume I was the help when they saw me at my own house. I'd grown accustomed to the double takes when I answered my door, the questions about whether the homeowner was available, the request to speak to someone in charge. But on this particular Tuesday afternoon in March, as I stood in my marble-floored foyer wearing my favorite cashmere sweater and waiting for my grocery delivery, I was just another customer. I had ordered from QuickCart. Yes, I used my own service regularly, and was expecting a delivery between 2 and 4 p.m. I had client calls that afternoon, so I'd specifically requested contactless delivery with a note to leave the bags by the front door. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was about to experience my own service from the customer's perspective. What I never expected was that this ordinary Tuesday would become the day I'd face the harsh reality that success and achievement couldn't always shield me from the prejudices that still existed in America. My morning had started like any other. I'd woken up at 5:30 a.m., gone for a run through the tree-lined streets of my neighborhood, and returned home to shower and prepare for another busy day of running my company. I had 3 major client presentations scheduled, a board meeting at 4 p.m., and a dinner with potential investors that evening. I'd built my morning routine around efficiency and focus. Coffee first. I had a high-end espresso machine that I'd treated myself to after our first profitable quarter. Then I'd check the overnight metrics from our West Coast operations, review any urgent emails, and plan my day. This particular morning, I'd noticed that our customer satisfaction scores in Cleveland had dipped slightly, and I'd made a mental note to investigate. My home office was my sanctuary, a room with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked my carefully landscaped backyard. I decorated it with awards from various business organizations, photos from company milestones, and inspirational quotes that had guided me through the challenging early days of building QuickCart. The centerpiece was a framed photo of my mother at my college graduation, beaming with pride as I received my summa cum laude honors. I'd spent the morning on calls with our expansion team, discussing plans to launch in Atlanta and Miami. We were growing faster than I'd ever imagined, and each new market brought new challenges and opportunities. The conversation had been energizing. We were talking about creating hundreds of new jobs, serving thousands of new customers, and continuing to build something that made a real difference in people's lives. Between calls, I'd placed my grocery order through our app, selecting items for the week ahead. Organic vegetables for the salads I'd been trying to eat more of, a nice bottle of wine for dinner with the investors, some specialty items from the gourmet section that I'd developed a taste for. The total came to just over $200, more than I'd ever imagined spending on groceries when I was growing up, but well within my means now. As I waited for the delivery, I'd been reviewing financial projections for our board meeting. The numbers were impressive. We were on track to exceed our revenue goals by 15%, and our profit margins were improving as we scaled our operations. I felt proud of what we'd built, confident about our future, and optimistic about the impact we could continue to have. I'd also been thinking about my mother, who was planning to visit the following weekend. She still lived in the same neighborhood in Detroit where I'd grown up, though in a much nicer house that I'd been able to buy for her once the business took off. She was proud of my success, but she also worried about me. "Don't let them make you forget where you came from," she'd tell me during our weekly calls. "And don't let them make you think you don't deserve everything you've earned." At 2:47 p.m., I received the notification that my delivery was arriving. I glanced out my front window and saw one of our QuickCart trucks, a white van with our green logo, pulling into my driveway. The driver was a middle-aged white man with graying hair and a substantial build. I didn't recognize him, but with over 200 drivers across our Cleveland operation, that wasn't unusual. I watched him get out of the truck and walk to the back to retrieve my order. He pulled out 3 bags, my weekly grocery haul that included organic produce, wine, and specialty items from the upscale grocery chain we partnered with. Everything seemed normal until he approached my front door. Instead of leaving the bags as requested, he stood there for a moment looking at my house, then at the bags, then back at my house. I could see him through the frosted glass of my front door, and something in his posture seemed off. He wasn't moving to set the bags down. He was scanning my property with obvious suspicion, taking in the manicured lawn, the expensive cars in my driveway, the architectural details that marked this as an upscale home. Then came the knock. A hard, demanding knock that didn't match our company's training for contactless delivery. It was the kind of knock police officers make when they're serving a warrant, aggressive, impatient, designed to intimidate. I opened the door with a smile, expecting a quick handoff. "Hi there, you can just set those right." He interrupted me, his voice sharp and accusatory. "I need to see some ID." I blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" "ID. I need to see identification that proves you live here." He was holding my grocery bags like they were evidence in a crime scene, clutching them protectively against his chest. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. This is my house and I ordered these groceries. The delivery is contactless, so you can just leave them by the door." His eyes narrowed as he looked me up and down, taking in my appearance with obvious suspicion. I was wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater, designer jeans, and simple gold jewelry, an outfit that had cost more than many people's monthly rent. But in his mind, none of that mattered. All he saw was a young black woman who, in his worldview, didn't belong in this setting. "Look, lady, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I'm not falling for it. This is a high-end neighborhood and these are expensive groceries. I need to see proof that you actually live here and can afford this order." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my face flush with a mixture of anger and humiliation. The assumptions embedded in his statement were staggering. He'd looked at me and immediately concluded that I couldn't possibly afford expensive groceries or live in a nice neighborhood. The idea that I might belong here naturally, that I might have earned my place through hard work and success, never even crossed his mind. "I beg your pardon? I ordered these groceries, they're paid for with my credit card, and this is my home. You have absolutely no right to demand identification." "I have every right," he said, his voice rising with indignation. "We've had problems with people in this area claiming packages and orders that aren't theirs. And frankly, you don't look like you belong in this neighborhood. You're probably some maid or babysitter trying to steal from the people you work for." There it was. The words that confirmed what I had suspected from the moment he'd looked at my house with suspicion. In his mind, there were only 2 explanations for my presence. I was either a criminal or domestic help. The possibility that I was a successful business owner, that I had built this life through my own efforts, was so foreign to his worldview that it didn't even register as an option. My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. I'm not showing you my ID. I've done nothing wrong. I am the customer, this is my home, and you're violating company policy by refusing to complete a paid delivery. He laughed, actually laughed, a sound so dismissive and cruel that it made my skin crawl. Company policy? Lady, I've been doing this job for 6 months and I know what theft looks like. You're probably some maid or nanny who thinks she can steal from the people she works for. Maybe you clean houses in this neighborhood and figured you could score some free groceries. Well, not on my watch. The assumptions he was making were so deeply rooted in prejudice that I felt momentarily speechless. He had constructed an entire narrative about who I was and what I was doing based solely on my race. In his story, I was a domestic worker who had somehow gained access to this neighborhood and was now attempting to commit fraud. The idea that I could be the rightful recipient of these groceries, that I could afford to live here, that I could be successful in my own right, was completely outside his frame of reference. Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time to complete this delivery. Set the bags down and leave, or I'll be reporting this incident to your company. My company? He smirked. Lady, I am the company. I'm protecting QuickCart from people like you who think you can scam the system. You want to threaten me? Go ahead. Call customer service. See how far that gets you when I tell them about your little theft attempt. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. Here was my own employee, threatening to report me to myself, completely confident that his version of events would be believed over mine. He was so certain of his own righteousness, so convinced that he was the hero in this story, that he couldn't see the racism in his own actions. You need to leave, I said, my voice shaking with controlled anger. Take the groceries and leave my property immediately. Oh, I'm leaving all right, he said, backing toward his truck with obvious satisfaction. But I'm keeping these groceries. And I'm reporting this attempted theft to the company. We'll see how smart you feel when the police show up to arrest you for fraud. I watched in disbelief as he loaded my groceries back into his truck. He moved with the confidence of someone who believed he was completely in the right, completely justified in his actions. He slammed the doors shut and climbed into the driver's seat, but not before rolling down his window to deliver one final insult. Next time, try ordering from somewhere more in your price range, he called out with a cruel smile. Maybe then you won't have to pretend to be someone you're not. And get yourself a better costume if you're going to keep trying this scam. That outfit might fool some people, but it doesn't fool me. The truck pulled out of my driveway, leaving me standing in my doorway, trembling with rage and humiliation. I had just been robbed, not just of my groceries but of my dignity, by one of my own employees. The man who had just driven away with my food was being paid by my company, driving a truck that I had purchased, wearing a uniform that bore my logo. I stood there for several minutes trying to process what had just happened. This was my neighborhood, my house, my company, my order. And yet I had been treated like a criminal, like an imposter, like someone who didn't belong. The driver had looked at me and seen only stereotypes and assumptions, completely blind to the reality of who I was and what I had accomplished. I closed my front door and leaned against it, my hands shaking as I tried to process what had just happened. In my own neighborhood, at my own home, I had been treated like a criminal because of the color of my skin. The delivery driver had seen a young black woman and immediately assumed I was either a thief or a domestic worker who didn't belong. The worst part was the casual confidence with which he'd made these assumptions. He hadn't hesitated, hadn't questioned his own prejudices. In his mind, the narrative was clear. Black woman in expensive neighborhood equals trouble. It was a story as old as America itself, and I had just lived it firsthand. I walked to my home office, a beautiful space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking my garden, and sat at my desk. The irony was suffocating. Here I was, in the office where I'd built a company that employed hundreds of people, including the very man who had just humiliated me. I had created jobs, provided opportunities, and prided myself on building an inclusive workplace. Yet when I was just another customer, none of that mattered. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant, Jennifer. How did the afternoon calls go? The Peterson Group seemed really interested in the expansion proposal. I stared at the message, realizing that I had completely forgotten about my client calls. The encounter with the delivery driver had shattered my entire afternoon. I was supposed to be discussing multi-million-dollar expansion plans, but instead I was sitting in my office, still reeling from being treated like a criminal in my own neighborhood. I tried to refocus on work, but my mind kept returning to the driver's words. You don't look like you belong in this neighborhood. The phrase echoed in my head, bringing back memories of every other time someone had questioned my right to be somewhere, to achieve something, to succeed. I remembered my first day at Michigan State, when my roommate's mother had asked if I was there on a special program, assuming I couldn't have earned my place academically. I remembered my first job interview after college, when the hiring manager had seemed surprised that I was the candidate with the impressive resume. I remembered the first time I tried to secure funding for QuickCart, when investor after investor had questioned whether I had the right background to run a tech company. Each incident had been painful, but I'd learned to push through, to prove myself over and over again. I'd thought that success would eventually insulate me from these experiences. I'd believed that if I worked hard enough, achieved enough, accumulated enough wealth and status, I could somehow transcend the prejudices that had followed me throughout my life. But this incident with the delivery driver showed me how naive I'd been. No amount of success could protect me from someone who looked at my skin color and made instant judgments about who I was and what I deserved. I opened my laptop and pulled up our company's internal systems. Within minutes, I had the driver's information. Marcus Wheeler, 52 years old, employed with QuickCart for 6 months. His employee photo showed a stern-faced man with graying hair and cold eyes. His address was in Parma, a working-class suburb about 20 minutes from Brookwood Heights. His ratings were mediocre. Several complaints about attitude and professionalism, but nothing that had triggered disciplinary action. I scrolled through his delivery history and noticed a pattern that made my stomach turn. In the past month, Marcus had completed 47 deliveries in affluent neighborhoods. Of those, 12 had been to addresses where, based on the names on the accounts, the customers were likely people of color. Of those 12 deliveries, 8 had been marked as customer unavailable or unable to verify recipient, forcing the customers to reschedule or pick up their orders at our facility. The pattern was clear. Marcus Wheeler had been systematically harassing customers based on racial profiling, and somehow, it had flown under our radar. How many other customers had experienced what I just went through? How many had been too intimidated to complain, or had complained and been dismissed? I felt sick. My company, the business I had built on principles of dignity and respect, had been used as a vehicle for discrimination. And worse, I had been completely oblivious to it. I spent the next hour diving deeper into our complaint system. I found buried reports from customers, mostly people with names that suggested they were minorities, describing encounters with drivers who had questioned their right to live in certain neighborhoods or demanded excessive verification for routine deliveries. One complaint from a customer named Jamal Washington described an incident almost identical to mine. Driver refused to complete delivery, claimed I didn't look like I belonged in the neighborhood, demanded to see ID and proof of residence. Very humiliating and inappropriate. Another from Maria Rodriguez. Driver was extremely rude and suspicious, acted like I was trying to steal something. Made me feel like a criminal in my own home. And another from David Kim. Driver questioned whether I really lived at this address, said the order was too expensive for someone like me. Unprofessional and discriminatory behavior. The complaints had been logged but not escalated, dismissed as isolated incidents or misunderstandings. But they weren't isolated. They were part of a pattern that revealed a systemic problem I had failed to recognize. As a black woman who had experienced discrimination throughout my life, I should have been more vigilant about protecting my customers from the same treatment. Instead, I had been so focused on growth and expansion that I had missed the warning signs. That evening, I sat in my kitchen, staring at my empty refrigerator. I had planned to cook dinner with the groceries that Marcus Wheeler had driven away with. Instead, I ordered takeout and tried to figure out how to move forward. The easy solution would have been to fire Marcus and move on. But I realized that wouldn't solve the underlying problem. If one driver felt comfortable enough to behave this way, how many others were harboring similar prejudices? How many customers were we losing because they felt unwelcome or disrespected? I thought about my mother's words, "You're going to have to work twice as hard to get half as far." I had worked twice as hard and I had built something meaningful. But now I was faced with the reality that success didn't insulate me from racism, it just gave me a better vantage point to see how pervasive it really was. I called my mother that night, something I rarely did on weeknights. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and concerned. "Maya? What's wrong, baby? You sound upset." I told her everything, about Marcus Wheeler, about the groceries, about the humiliation I'd felt standing in my own doorway being treated like a criminal. When I finished, there was a long silence. "Mama?" I said. "Are you there?" "I'm here, baby," she said, and I could hear the pain in her voice. "I'm here and I'm sorry. I'm sorry you had to go through that, and I'm sorry that all your success couldn't protect you from that man's ignorance. I thought it would be different, I said, feeling tears I'd been holding back all day. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I achieved enough, if I proved myself enough times. I know, baby. I know. But you listen to me, what happened today doesn't diminish anything you've accomplished. That man's prejudice says nothing about you and everything about him. You are successful. You do belong in that neighborhood. You have earned every single thing you have. But how do I make sure this doesn't happen to other people? How do I fix this? The same way you fixed everything else in your life, she said. By being smarter, stronger, and more determined than the people who want to tear you down. You turn this pain into power, and you use that power to make sure no one else has to go through what you went through today. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time thinking about what she'd said. Turn this pain into power. Use that power to create change. It wasn't enough to be successful if that success didn't create opportunities for others to succeed as well. The next morning, I received an email that made my blood boil. It was from Marcus Wheeler, sent through our internal reporting system at 11:47 p.m. the night before. Dear management, I am writing to report a serious attempted theft that occurred during my delivery shift yesterday afternoon. A customer at 1247 Brookwood Heights Drive attempted to claim an order that was clearly not intended for her. The individual, a black female approximately 30 to 35 years old, was obviously not the rightful recipient of the high-end grocery order, as she clearly did not belong in that affluent neighborhood and became hostile and threatening when I requested proper identification. The order in question was worth over $200 and included expensive items like organic produce and premium wine. It was immediately apparent that this individual could not afford such items and was likely attempting to steal the delivery. When I professionally requested identification to verify her identity, she became aggressive and refused to comply, which confirmed my suspicions about her intentions. I prevented the theft by refusing to complete the delivery and returning the items to the warehouse as per company protocol. I believe this individual may be part of a larger fraud scheme targeting our service in affluent areas, possibly involving domestic workers or other service personnel who have access to upscale neighborhoods. I recommend that we implement stricter verification procedures for deliveries in high-end neighborhoods to prevent future incidents of this nature. We should require photo ID for all deliveries over $150 in affluent areas, and drivers should be given more discretion to refuse deliveries when the recipient appears suspicious or out of place. I am willing to provide additional details and testimony if needed for any investigation or legal proceedings. I have 15 years of experience in customer service and delivery, and I pride myself on protecting company assets and maintaining the highest standards of security. This incident highlights the need for better training and protocols to help drivers identify potential theft attempts. I volunteer to help develop these procedures based on my experience with this attempted fraud. Sincerely, Marcus Wheeler. Driver ID, 4751. Employee since September 2024 Inch. I read the email 3 times, each time feeling more furious. He had actually reported me for attempting to steal my own groceries. The audacity was breathtaking. But what made it worse was the language he used, obviously not the rightful recipient, clearly did not belong, appears suspicious or out of place. He had written this report with complete confidence that his version of events would be believed. He expected his supervisors to read this and nod in agreement, to implement his suggestions for stricter verification procedures that would essentially create a system of racial profiling in our delivery operations. This wasn't just one man's prejudice. This was a mindset that needed to be challenged and changed. And I was in a unique position to do exactly that. But first, I needed to understand the full scope of the problem. I spent the rest of the morning analyzing our delivery data more comprehensively. What I found was even worse than I had initially discovered. Our completion rates varied dramatically by neighborhood demographics. In predominantly white, affluent areas like Brookwood Heights, our completion rate was 94%. In predominantly black neighborhoods, it was 71%. In Latino neighborhoods, it was 73%. In mixed-income areas, it fell somewhere in between, often correlating with the racial composition of the area. I dug deeper into the customer service data and found that complaints about driver behavior were significantly higher from customers with names that suggested they were minorities. These complaints often described drivers who were rude, suspicious, or unprofessional, but they had been categorized as personality conflicts, rather than potential discrimination. Even more troubling, I found that several customers had canceled their accounts after negative experiences with drivers. In exit surveys, many mentioned feeling unwelcome or treated poorly, but our customer service team had coded these as generic dissatisfaction rather than investigating the specific incidents. We were losing customers, damaging our reputation, and perpetuating discrimination, all while being completely blind to the problem. My success as a black woman CEO meant nothing if my company was actively harming other people who looked like me. I spent the next 3 days developing a comprehensive plan. I could have simply fired Marcus Wheeler and issued a public apology. I could have implemented new training programs and moved on. But this situation required more than damage control. It required a fundamental shift in how we approached equity and inclusion in our business. First, I decided to give Marcus Wheeler exactly what he was asking for: an investigation. But not the kind he expected. I called an emergency meeting with my senior leadership team: my COO, David Chin, my head of HR, Sarah Martinez, my head of customer experience, James Thompson, and my head of operations, Patricia Williams. I didn't tell them about my personal experience with Marcus. Instead, I presented them with the data I had compiled about delivery patterns and complaints. "We have a problem," I said, pulling up charts and graphs on the conference room screen. "Our delivery completion rates vary significantly based on neighborhood demographics. We're failing to serve customers equitably, and it's not just bad for business, it's morally wrong." The room fell silent as they absorbed the implications. The data was undeniable, stark in its revelation of systemic bias in our operations. David was the first to speak. "Maya, this is really bad. How did we miss this?" "Because we weren't looking for it," I replied. "We were measuring overall satisfaction and completion rates, but we weren't disaggregating the data by race or neighborhood. We assumed that treating all customers the same meant we were being equitable. But equality and equity aren't the same thing." Sarah leaned forward, her face pale. "What do you want to do?" "I want to implement a comprehensive audit of our delivery practices. I want to interview every customer who filed a complaint in the past year. I want to review the performance of every driver who has patterns of incomplete deliveries in diverse neighborhoods. And I want to do it transparently." James looked concerned. "Maya, that's going to be expensive. And if we find widespread problems, we could face lawsuits, media scrutiny, damage to our brand." "Good," I said firmly. "If we've been enabling discrimination, we deserve scrutiny. And if we handle this right, we'll come out stronger. We'll be the delivery company that took responsibility for its failures and implemented real solutions." Patricia nodded slowly. "What's the timeline for this audit?" 2 weeks, I said. "I want a full report on my desk in 2 weeks. And I want recommendations for immediate action items we can implement while we develop longer-term solutions." Over the next week, we conducted the most thorough audit in our company's history. We hired an external consulting firm that specialized in bias and discrimination to help ensure objectivity. We reviewed thousands of delivery records, analyzed customer complaint patterns, and conducted detailed interviews with both customers and drivers. The results were worse than I had imagined. We identified 12 drivers with patterns similar to Marcus Wheeler's, drivers who had significantly lower completion rates in diverse neighborhoods and higher complaint rates from customers of color. We found 47 customers who had experienced discrimination but hadn't filed formal complaints, often because they didn't think it would make a difference or were afraid of retaliation. We discovered that our customer service team had been dismissing complaints about driver behavior as personality conflicts, rather than investigating potential bias. They had been trained to de-escalate situations and move on, not to recognize patterns of discrimination. Most damaging of all, we found that our overall completion rates in predominantly white neighborhoods were 94%, while our completion rates in predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods were 71% and 73% respectively. The disparity was stark, undeniable, and completely unacceptable. We also uncovered disturbing patterns in our hiring and training practices. While we had a diverse workforce overall, our management positions were predominantly white. Our training materials included no content about cultural sensitivity or bias recognition. Our performance evaluation system rewarded efficiency over customer satisfaction, creating incentives for drivers to make quick judgments rather than provide quality service to all customers. But I wasn't done with Marcus Wheeler yet. I had a special plan for him. On Friday afternoon, I called him directly using a blocked number and disguising my voice slightly. "Mr. Wheeler, this is Patricia Williams from QuickCart Corporate Investigations. I'm calling about your report regarding the attempted theft on Brookwood Heights Drive." "Oh yes, ma'am," he said eagerly, his voice practically vibrating with excitement. I'm so glad someone is finally taking this seriously. These people think they can just walk into nice neighborhoods and steal whatever they want. It's about time this company started protecting itself from these scammers. Mr. Wheeler, I've reviewed your report, and I'm very impressed with your attention to detail and your commitment to protecting company assets. We need more drivers like you who are willing to stand up to thieves and fraudsters. Thank you, ma'am. I've got 15 years of experience in customer service, and I know how to spot trouble. That woman was definitely up to no good. You could tell just by looking at her that she didn't belong in that neighborhood. I had to bite my tongue to keep from responding to his blatant racism. Mr. Wheeler, I need you to come to our corporate office on Monday morning at 9 a.m. We're conducting a formal investigation, and we need your detailed testimony. This could be a very important case for us. Absolutely, ma'am. I'll be there with bells on. Do you want me to bring anything? Photos, documentation? Just bring yourself and be prepared to tell us exactly what happened. Oh, and Mr. Wheeler? This investigation is confidential. Don't discuss it with anyone else until after our meeting. You got it? I won't say a word. And ma'am? Thank you for taking this seriously. It's nice to know that management supports drivers who are trying to do the right thing. I hung up and felt a grim satisfaction. Marcus Wheeler was about to get exactly what he deserved. Monday morning arrived gray and overcast, matching my mood. I had barely slept, running through the confrontation in my mind over and over. At 8:45 a.m., I positioned myself in the main conference room with Sarah, David, and our head of legal, Robert Kim. Through the glass walls, I could see Marcus Wheeler in the lobby, checking his watch and straightening his tie. He was wearing his best clothes, a cheap suit that was slightly too small and a tie with a garish pattern. He clearly thought he was about to be commended for his vigilance. I watched him interact with our receptionist, noting how his demeanor changed when he realized she was Latina. His friendly smile became more forced, his tone more condescending. Even in this simple interaction, his prejudices were on full display. At exactly 9 a.m., Sarah escorted him into the conference room. He walked in with confidence, his chest puffed out, ready to tell his story and be praised for his heroism. But when he saw me sitting at the head of the table, his face went white. "Have a seat, Mr. Wheeler," I said calmly, gesturing to the chair across from me. He looked around confused, glancing at Sarah, David, and Robert as if they might explain what was happening. "I don't understand. I'm supposed to be meeting with Patricia Williams about my report." "I am Patricia Williams," I said, maintaining eye contact. "Well, actually, I'm Maya Johnson. I'm the founder and CEO of Quick Cart Delivery. And I'm the woman you refused to deliver groceries to last Tuesday." The color drained completely from his face. He opened and closed his mouth several times, but no words came out. I could see his mind racing, trying to process this information, trying to figure out how his simple story of preventing theft had become this nightmare scenario. "Mr. Wheeler," I continued, my voice steady and professional, "you filed a report claiming that I attempted to steal groceries from my own company. You stated that I, obviously, did not belong in my own neighborhood. You recommended that we implement stricter verification procedures for deliveries in upscale neighborhoods. Did you file that report?" I didn't know." He stammered, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. "You didn't know what? That I was the CEO? That I owned the house? That I had every right to be there?" My voice remained calm, but the anger was building. "Or did you not know that your assumptions about me were based purely on the color of my skin?" Robert slid a folder across the table to him. "Mr. Wheeler, we've conducted a comprehensive audit of your delivery patterns. In the past 6 months, you've had an 87% completion rate in predominantly white neighborhoods and a 31% completion rate in predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods. Can you explain this disparity?" He looked at the papers, his hands shaking as he tried to read the statistics that damned him. I was just being careful. There's a lot of theft in certain areas." "Certain areas?" I leaned forward, my eyes never leaving his face. "Mr. Wheeler, the highest income neighborhood on your route is Brookwood Heights, where you refused to deliver my groceries. The lowest income neighborhood is Riverside, which is predominantly white, where you've never had a single incomplete delivery. So your theory about theft and income doesn't hold up, does it?" David opened his laptop and turned it toward Marcus. "We've also reviewed security footage from several of your deliveries. We found multiple instances where you demanded ID from customers of color but never from white customers, even when delivering to the same street on the same day. The evidence was overwhelming. Security cameras had captured Marcus demanding identification from a young Black mother while delivering to her home on Maple Street, then delivering to a white family 3 houses down without any verification whatsoever. The footage showed him scrutinizing a Latino man's driver's license for several minutes before reluctantly completing a delivery, then cheerfully handing groceries to an elderly white woman without any questions. Sarah pulled out another document. We've also identified 11 other customers who filed complaints about your behavior. Would you like me to read some of their statements? Please do, I said, though my tone made it clear this wasn't really a request. From Mrs. Chin, driver demanded to see my lease agreement and questioned whether I could afford the groceries I ordered. Made me feel like a criminal in my own home. From Mr. Rodriguez, driver refused to believe I lived at this address and insisted on calling the homeowner to verify. Extremely humiliating and unprofessional. From Ms. Thompson, driver asked if I was the maid and whether the real customer was home. When I explained that I was the customer, he demanded multiple forms of ID and asked to see my bank statements. Marcus Wheeler sat in stunned silence, realizing that his world was crumbling around him. The pattern of discrimination was undeniable, documented not just in statistics but in the painful testimonies of customers he had humiliated and degraded. Finally, he looked up at me with something that might have been remorse, though I suspected it was more likely fear for his job. I wasn't trying to. You weren't trying to what? Be racist? Discriminate against customers? Make assumptions based on stereotypes. I stood up, feeling the full weight of my authority and the righteousness of my anger. Mr. Wheeler, you didn't just refuse to deliver my groceries. You stole them. You called me a thief. You told me I didn't belong in my own neighborhood. And then you filed a false report accusing me of fraud. I walked around the table and stood behind him, my voice growing more intense. But more than that, you've been systematically harassing customers based on their race for months. You've made dozens of people feel unwelcome, unsafe, and disrespected. You've damaged our company's reputation and violated everything we stand for. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice barely audible. You're sorry? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Mr. Wheeler, you're not sorry about what you did. You're sorry that you got caught. You're sorry that the woman you tried to humiliate turned out to be your boss. But you're not sorry about the assumptions you made or the customers you mistreated, are you? He couldn't meet my eyes. I just thought. You thought what? That black people don't belong in nice neighborhoods? That we can't afford expensive groceries? That we're inherently suspicious and untrustworthy? I returned to my seat and looked him directly in the eyes. Your thoughts, Mr. Wheeler, are the problem. Your assumptions are rooted in racism, and your actions have caused real harm to real people. Robert leaned forward. Mr. Wheeler, in addition to the pattern of discriminatory behavior, you've also violated several company policies. You failed to complete assigned deliveries without proper justification. You demanded unnecessary verification from customers. You filed a false report. And you engaged in conduct that damages the company's reputation. What does this mean? Marcus asked, though I think he already knew. It means you're fired, effective immediately, I said. Security will escort you out. You'll receive your final paycheck minus the cost of the groceries you stole from me. And if you ever apply for a job in this industry again, any reference check will include a full disclosure of why you were terminated. Sarah handed him a termination letter. Mr. Wheeler, you're also banned from all Quick Cart facilities and from using our services as a customer. If you attempt to place an order or enter any of our properties, you'll be trespassing. This isn't fair, he said, finally finding his voice again. I was just doing my job. I was trying to protect the company. No, Mr. Wheeler, I said firmly. You were not doing your job. Your job was to deliver groceries to paying customers with professionalism and respect. Instead, you chose to play judge and jury based on your own prejudices. You chose to see theft where there was none, danger where there was only a customer waiting for her order. But you have to understand, he pleaded, in my experience. Your experience? I cut him off. Your experience is exactly the problem. Your experience taught you to see Black and Latino customers as threats rather than people. Your experience told you that success and wealth have a color, and that color isn't black or brown. Well, let me give you a new experience to consider. I gestured around the conference room at the company logo on the wall, at the photos of our various locations and achievements. This company was built by a young black woman from Detroit who was told she would never amount to anything. Every job you've had in the delivery industry, every paycheck you've received, every benefit you've enjoyed, all of it exists because someone who looks like me worked twice as hard to create opportunities for people like you. And how did you repay that opportunity? By stealing from me. By humiliating me. By filing false reports. By treating customers who look like me as criminals and thieves. I stood up again, my voice rising with emotion. You took my generosity, my willingness to give you a second chance, and you used it as a weapon against me and people like me. As security escorted him out, Marcus Wheeler turned back one last time. This isn't over, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. I'll file a complaint. I'll tell people what really happened. Please do, I said with complete confidence. Tell them that you were fired for discriminating against customers. Tell them that you refused to deliver groceries to the CEO of your own company because you didn't think a black woman could afford them. Tell them that you filed false reports and engaged in systematic racial profiling. I'm sure that will work out well for you. The story of Marcus Wheeler's termination could have ended there, but I decided to use it as a catalyst for something much bigger. The following week, I published a blog post on our company website titled, When Your CEO Looks Like Your Customer. A lesson in equity, accountability, and the work that still needs to be done. In the post, I detailed my experience with Marcus Wheeler without naming him, but I included all the data we had collected about delivery disparities. I talked about the assumptions people make about success and belonging, about the invisible barriers that still exist in American society, and about the responsibility businesses have to actively fight discrimination rather than simply avoiding it. I wrote about the painful irony of being discriminated against by my own employee, about the realization that my success as a black woman CEO meant nothing if my company was perpetuating the same prejudices I had faced throughout my life. I discussed the comprehensive audit we had conducted, the patterns of bias we had uncovered, and the concrete steps we were taking to address them. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 24 hours, the blog post had been shared over 50,000 times on social media. It was picked up by major news outlets including CNN, The Washington Post, and Forbes. The comments section filled with hundreds of stories from people who had experienced similar discrimination, not just in delivery services but in retail stores, restaurants, banks, and virtually every other industry. But not all the feedback was positive. Some people accused me of playing the race card, and claimed I was making a big deal out of nothing. Others suggested that Marcus Wheeler had been just doing his job, and that I was being too sensitive. Several commenters insisted that discrimination was a thing of the past and that I was manufacturing problems where none existed. The criticism stung, but it also reinforced why this conversation was necessary. The fact that some people couldn't see the problem was exactly the problem. The denial and defensiveness in some of the responses proved that bias and discrimination were still very much alive, still very much impacting people's daily lives. I decided to take it further. I announced that QuickCart would be implementing a comprehensive equity and inclusion initiative that would include mandatory bias training for all employees, focusing on unconscious bias, cultural competency, and recognizing discrimination. A complete overhaul of our hiring practices to ensure diverse representation at all levels of the company. A customer advocacy program that would proactively reach out to customers in underserved communities. An independent equity audit of all our practices, from hiring to service delivery, conducted by external experts. A commitment to transparent reporting of our demographic data and customer satisfaction metrics, broken down by race and neighborhood. A partnership with local civil rights organizations to provide accountability and ongoing guidance. The establishment of a customer equity hotline where people could report discrimination anonymously. Financial compensation for customers who had experienced discrimination, along with personal apologies from me. The program cost us nearly $750,000 in the first year, but it was worth every penny. Our customer satisfaction scores increased across all demographics. Our employee retention improved significantly. We attracted new customers who chose us specifically because of our commitment to equity. Most importantly, we became a model for other companies trying to address similar issues. 6 months later, I received a letter that made everything worthwhile. It was from Maria Santos, a customer in East Cleveland who had been ordering from us for 2 years. Dear Ms. Johnson, she wrote, I wanted to thank you for what you did. I had been having problems with drivers who seemed to think I didn't belong in my neighborhood. I'm a nurse practitioner who worked very hard to buy my home after my husband died. Several times, drivers questioned whether I really lived at my address or could afford the groceries I ordered. It was humiliating and made me want to stop using delivery services altogether. After your blog post and the changes you made, my deliveries have been perfect. But more than that, you made me feel seen and heard. You turned your painful experience into something that helped all of us. You showed me that my experiences were valid, that I wasn't being too sensitive, and that someone with power was willing to fight for people like me. My teenage daughter read your blog post for a school project about modern civil rights leaders. She told me, "Mom, now I know that when I'm successful, I can use my success to help other people too." You didn't just change your company, you gave my daughter a role model and a roadmap for how to use success responsibly. Thank you for not staying quiet. Thank you for not just firing that driver and moving on. Thank you for doing the hard work of real change. I kept that letter in my desk drawer and read it whenever I questioned whether the fight was worth it. But the changes we implemented went beyond just fixing the problems Marcus Wheeler had created. We discovered that our entire approach to customer service had been flawed. We had been measuring efficiency over equity, completion rates over customer dignity. We had been so focused on growth that we had lost sight of our original mission, serving our community with care and respect. The equity audit revealed additional problems we hadn't even considered. Our marketing materials featured predominantly white families, sending a subtle message about who we considered our target customers. Our customer service scripts included no training on how to handle complaints about discrimination. Our performance review process rewarded drivers for speed and efficiency but included no metrics for customer dignity or respect. We changed all of that. We rewrote our marketing materials to reflect the diversity of our actual customer base. We hired a chief diversity officer to ensure that equity remained a priority as we continued to grow. We created new performance metrics that included customer respect scores alongside traditional efficiency measures. Most importantly, I instituted a policy that any employee could be terminated immediately for discriminatory behavior, regardless of their position or length of service. We made it clear that working for QuickCart meant committing to treating all customers with dignity and respect, and that violations of this principle would not be tolerated. The changes weren't without challenges. Some employees resisted the new training requirements. A few drivers quit rather than participate in bias education. Some investors questioned whether we were being too political by taking such a strong stance on discrimination. But the results spoke for themselves. Within a year, our customer satisfaction scores were at an all-time high. Our completion rates were now identical across all demographic groups. We had expanded to 2 new cities and were being recognized as an industry leader in customer service and corporate responsibility. More importantly, we had created a culture where discrimination wasn't just discouraged, it was impossible. Our drivers knew they were being monitored not just for efficiency but for respect. Our customers knew they could report problems without fear of retaliation. Our entire organization understood that equity wasn't just a nice idea, it was a business imperative. As I sit here today, almost 2 years after the incident with Marcus Wheeler, I've learned that success is not just about building a profitable business or achieving personal goals. True success is about using your platform, your resources, and your voice to create positive change in the world. The assumption that I didn't belong in my own neighborhood was rooted in centuries of stereotypes and prejudices that still persist in American society. But instead of letting that experience diminish me, I chose to use it as fuel for transformation, not just for myself but for my company and hopefully for the broader business community. I learned that discrimination doesn't disappear when you reach a certain level of success. If anything, it becomes more insidious because people expect you to be grateful for your achievements and not to rock the boat by calling out injustice. The higher you climb, the more isolated you can become, and the more pressure you feel to prove that your success is deserved rather than challenging the systems that make success harder for people who look like you. But I also learned that with success comes responsibility. I had the power to change not just my own situation, but the experiences of hundreds of other customers who had been treated unfairly. I had the resources to implement real solutions, not just empty promises. Most importantly, I had the platform to start conversations that needed to happen, even when they were uncomfortable. The delivery driver who refused to bring me my groceries thought he was protecting his company from a thief. What he didn't realize was that he was stealing from all of us, stealing dignity, respect, and the promise of equal treatment that should be fundamental to any business in America. I could have handled the situation quietly, firing Marcus Wheeler and moving on. But quiet solutions to loud problems don't create lasting change. Sometimes you have to be willing to be uncomfortable, to face criticism, to invest in solutions that cost money and time, because that's what real leadership requires. My mother was right when she told me I'd have to work twice as hard to get half as far. But she also taught me that the goal isn't just to make the journey for yourself, it's to make the journey easier for those who come after you. Every barrier I broke, every ceiling I shattered, every assumption I challenged made it a little bit easier for the next young black woman who dreams of building something meaningful. Today, QuickCart serves customers in 15 cities, employs over 3,000 people, and has delivered over 25 million orders. But I'm most proud of the fact that our customer satisfaction scores are identical across all demographic groups. We've proven that equity isn't just the right thing to do, it's good business. When you treat all customers with dignity and respect, when you create an inclusive workplace where everyone can thrive, when you actively fight against discrimination rather than simply avoiding it, everybody wins. The young boy who grows up in Detroit today, watching his single mother work multiple jobs to pay the bills, doesn't have to wonder if he'll be welcome in the neighborhood he dreams of living in someday. The young woman starting her first business doesn't have to worry that her success will be questioned because of her race or gender. The customer placing an order for groceries doesn't have to fear that their driver will judge them based on their appearance rather than treating them with the respect every paying customer deserves. That's the America I'm building, one delivery at a time, one policy at a time, one conversation at a time. It's an America where your zip code doesn't determine the quality of service you receive, where your race doesn't influence whether you're treated as a valued customer or a potential threat, where success is measured not just by profit margins but by the positive impact you have on your community. Marcus Wheeler saw me as someone who didn't belong. I proved to him, and to myself, that I belong everywhere my hard work and determination can take me. More importantly, I used my position to ensure that everyone else knows they belong too. But the work isn't finished. Discrimination didn't end when I fired one prejudiced driver, and it won't end when other companies implement their own equity initiatives. It will end when we collectively decide that treating people with dignity and respect isn't just good business practice. It's the minimum standard for how we interact with each other as human beings. Every time a customer places an order with QuickCart, they're not just buying groceries, they're participating in a vision of what American business can be when it's built on principles of equity, inclusion, and justice. Every time one of our drivers completes a delivery with professionalism and respect, they're proving that it's possible to succeed while treating all people as worthy of dignity. The America I dreamed of as a young girl in Detroit, an America where hard work and talent could overcome prejudice and discrimination, is still being built. It's being built by people like me who refuse to accept that this is just how things are, who use their success as a platform for change rather than a refuge from responsibility. They judged me by my appearance and assumed I was a thief. I showed them the power of ownership, accountability, and justice. But most importantly, I showed them that when you have the privilege of success, you have the responsibility to lift others up with you. That's not just good business. That's the American dream at its finest, not just the dream of individual success, but the dream of creating a society where everyone has the opportunity to succeed, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. The delivery driver thought he was protecting his company from someone who didn't belong. Instead, he helped me build a company where everyone belongs. And for that lesson, as painful as it was to learn, I'm almost grateful. Almost.